All right, well, I will kick it off and get started. People will probably continue to join, but welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Rachel Stock and I work on the marketing team here at West Academic. We have a great webinar planned today. We'll be hearing from Brooke Coleman and Stephen Baicker-McKee. They are two of our authors on the Learning Civil Procedure Casebook. They'll be sharing tips and strategies for making online learning a great experience for both students and faculty. We do have some time saved at the end for a Q&A portion, so feel free to submit your questions and we'll make sure to get to them. And with that, I will hand it over to Brooke and Steve.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Brooke Coleman, and I want to welcome you all today. What Steve and I, my amazing co-author, hope to do today is to kind of make this simpler, if that's possible. I know everyone is overwhelmed and our new normal is just coming at us fast and furious. But what we hope to leave you with today are some tips that are going to help you take what you're already doing in the classroom and just easily translate that into an online format. So today what we're going to do, Steve, if you want to advance the slide, we're going to talk about a few different things. And of course, we will welcome as many questions as possible at the end. We're going to talk about the advantages of repetition, the idea that we want to just keep doing stuff over and over and how online makes that so easy. We're going to talk about student learning before class. We're going to talk about student learning during class. We're going to talk about student learning after class. And then one of the things is managing your schedule, because in this new normal, what are we going to do with this schedule? And we're going to talk a little about that. And then finally, opportunities for creating inclusiveness and how to make that work. So again, Steve and I are not bells and whistles kind of people. We're not super fancy. So we're not going to try to, inundate you with all of this technology. What we really want to do is get to the bare bones of what teaching and learning is all about and how you can best translate what you do really well into the online format. So Steve, if you can start us off with about repetition and how that works.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brooke, and welcome everyone. I'm really excited to be here and be part of this. This is something that we're all struggling with, and so it's wonderful to have the opportunity to have this discussion. So the first concept we wanted to start with is spaced repetition. And the idea behind spaced repetition is, instead of presenting the material one time and expecting students to sort of absorb it and retain it and be able to give it back to you in a coherent fashion, repetition, and particularly spaced repetition, is much more effective. There's a ton of research on spaced repetition. Unfortunately, not too surprisingly, but unfortunately, it's almost entirely outside of the law school setting. But this research is really impressive. So here's a good example. Let's say, here's something I'm terrible at, which is remembering names. So if I run into someone and they say, "Oh, my name's Mark," the chance that the next time I see Mark, I will remember Mark's name is practically zero. So let's say the next day I say to myself, "Okay, Mark," that guy's name was Mark. That's fairly much better. Not wonderful, but it's improved. So one repetition even is better. Suppose that next day, instead of saying Mark, I say Mark, 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 Mark. Okay, I've said it a bunch of times. Not all that much better than just saying it once. But let's say 2 days later, I say, "Oh yeah, that guy's name is Mark." And a week after that, I say, "Okay, that guy's name is Mark." Now I'm starting to, that's going to be internalized. I'm going to remember that. And that's the idea behind this spaced repetition. And the research says it's really powerful. The research also says that quizzes are a particularly beneficial form of repetition. So it's one thing for me to say, "Oh yeah, his name is Mark." But if I'm asked, "Okay, what's that guy's name?" and I have to recall it based on this prompt, that's even more powerful. So this is a lot of what we're going to talk about, is how to incorporate these concepts into what you do for online teaching. There is, I said, most of the research is outside of the context of law schools, but there's a wonderful article on learning theory in law schools, and that site is here for you if you'd like to take a look at that. I highly commend it. One of the things that they said in that article is one law school adopted and embraced this idea of spaced repetition across their curriculum, and they had a bar passage rate increase of 20%. And I know we would all kill for that type of increase in our bar passage rate. So this is really powerful stuff. Okay, so how do we do that? And I'll just tell you some of the ways I've incorporated repetition into the way I teach. So the first iteration of the materials, and we're going to go through, I'm not going to describe these in detail. We're going to go through some of them as we go through the program, but obviously you're going to have them do the reading. So I'll assign reading relating to the particular topic. What I've done is then created an asynchronous video lecture, and we'll talk about those in a few minutes. That is the second repetition, the second iteration of the material. The content I used to deliver in class, now I'm delivering ahead of time. I flipped that and I'm delivering that ahead of time by video. Then I have a pre-class assessment. Brooke and I both use pre-class assessments. We do it a little differently, so we'll talk about that coming up. But that's some sort of quiz or exercise that makes them recall the material yet again. Then we'll do classroom activities, again related to the material, and we'll talk about what those classroom activities might be like in our online environment. Then there's a post-class assessment, again, probably a quiz or some sort of exercise that causes them to recall the material again. Finally, or almost finally, when I start the next class, I'll have a recap of what we covered the previous class, one more repetition, and I'll show you how we lead the students through that. And then the final concept is scaffolding. So for example, if I started the semester fairly early on with subject matter jurisdiction, then when I get to joinder, I will also have the students go through a subject matter jurisdiction analysis of claims or parties that we're trying to add to the case, again, making them a nice space where they're having to, again, recall all that stuff and work through it again yet another time. So that's how I use repetition. Brooke?
All right, great. Now we're going to talk about student learning before class, as Steve mentioned. And of course, it's also not a Zoom without my cat visiting. So that's part of what we do now too. But as Steve discussed, repetition is key. But with every repeat, what you want to kind of do, I think, is increase the depth and increase how much they're learning and changing that. Online learning is great for this because we used to try to stuff all of this kind of into a reading and a class. But now what we can do is stage things. We can put them in modular form so they can do pieces of it at a time. So in this example on the PowerPoint that you're looking at, it's my venue module from Canvas. Canvas is the online learning platform that SU uses. And here I did venue almost 95% asynchronously, basically. So they did almost all their venue work on their own. Then we met in class for a little bit to discuss it, and then they did some work after. What I want to highlight here is the before work that they did. So as you can see here, as Steve mentioned, there was a reading assigned. And Steve, if you don't mind moving to the next slide, what I can show everyone is my venue PowerPoint that I did. So go ahead and push play, Steve, and they can hear a little bit of that.
Hey, today's topic is venue, and venue is all about where you are in litigation, not with respect to time, but with respect to geography. So let's get started with a few kind of overview concepts about.
So super high tech, right? All I did was I took my notes that I would normally do in class. I put them into a PowerPoint. And then I just walk through verbally all of the lecture notes that I would have otherwise given. Now, the thing that I did here, and if Steve can move to the next slide, you can see what I did was I also embedded multiple choice questions in the video. Steve and I do this a little differently. These are just basic, are you paying attention kind of questions. And what I do is pepper those through the video. So that way I'm sure that the students are tending to the video, but also understanding the concept. I've done this not with videos as well, so just on their own. When my students read International Shoe, they had to answer basic questions about that reading before they came to class. And this is just a way to make sure that they have a basic comprehension before they then move on. But I want Steve to share what he does with his free class as well.
Yeah, and my approach is actually quite similar to yours, Brooke, with maybe a little twist just on the quizzes. So my videos are very similar. I take exactly what I would have said in class as the content delivery portion of my class. I use my same PowerPoints and I just say the same thing I probably would have said in class, and I do it on a video, and I don't edit it. I don't do anything to it. It takes no time at all, hardly. And it is tremendously well received by students. They love it because they can then go back and watch it again when they're studying, or if there's something they missed, they can slow down, rewind, watch it again. So I started doing this years ago with just a few, and every review I got in the evaluations was like, please do more videos. What I do differently is I'm not quite as slick as Brooke is, so I don't embed these questions or quizzes as part of the video, but instead I give them the questions I'm going to add, the quiz I'm going to ask them after we're done with the material. I give it to them before class. And that's using a technique called priming, or a learning theory called priming. So they do the reading, they watch the video, they're nodding along, they're thinking, this makes perfect sense. I got it. I'm all over this. And then you give them some multiple choice questions, and mine are harder. So mine aren't the basic thing that Brooke is doing. I'm asking fairly tricky questions. And they realize then, wait a second, I didn't understand it as well as I thought. And then they are primed for the things that they didn't get. So they come to class listening for, what was that concept that drove the answer to number 2, which I didn't get number 2. So they're then attuned, they're primed to take things out of class that they might not otherwise have got. But similar approach to what we're doing before class. So moving on to what we do during class, I think we do this pretty similarly, but a little bit different. And we do, I think this is first of all, this model that we've used where you upload, you flip the class, the videos and the reading and the initial exercises are before class, leaves way more class for interactive discussion. And that's really what is rich and rewarding for the students, and what I find much more rich and rewarding as well. So some sort of interactive class time is so precious and valuable. And this approach gives you way more of that. Almost my entire class is some sort of exercise that I'm working on with the students. Many case books are full of cases. This is where you would be doing Socratic dialogue with students regarding cases. Our book, and my personal approach as well, tends to emphasize hypos and exercises more than cases. But we're doing the same thing. We are doing some sort of Socratic exchange with the students, light Socratic exchange, where we are making them work through the analysis with the class, with us asking questions and probing them. So just a really quick example to walk through. I might put up a hypo like this, this is on a cross claim. So it's a problem about some sort of stock transaction, and one defendant wants to bring a cross claim against another. So I put up the problem. Depending on the format, I might give the students a minute or two, or make some little breakout groups on Zoom to give them a minute or two to discuss it. So they get a chance to get comfortable and maybe talk, not in front of the whole class, but just with a classmate. And then I'll put up a diagram and we'll go through the exercise like this. So this is that scaffolding approach I was talking about. So I might start this one with, before we get into cross claims, let's talk about subject matter jurisdiction. Could this claim be brought in court in the first instance? And I've developed this admission ticket imagery or analogy for federal subject matter jurisdiction. So you need an admission ticket, a claim with original jurisdiction to get in the first place. So I'd start with, is there an admission ticket here? And they'd work through and they'd say, okay, yes, there is diversity. Then I'd say, okay, well, what joinder rule are we talking about for this cross claim? So I'd have a student identify what the joinder rule is, and then I'd ask them what's the test, and they'd give me the test, or we work through that. Then we'd apply it, come up with the answer. And then I'd say, okay, now we're in court, we've satisfied the rules component. How about we still need subject matter jurisdiction for this new claim? And I've got this guest pass concept for other claims where now supplemental is available as well as original jurisdiction. And then we'd work through, is there federal question diversity? Oh, look, there's supplemental. So that's how that's a lot of my classes working through hypos like this.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think that's right. And I find the same thing. I mean, I think when Steve and I and our other co-authors drafted our book, it was because we wanted to spend more time in class doing problems and working through the material. And online education really provides a perfect opportunity for that to happen, because the lecture is just, I mean, to be frank, fairly boring, and Socratic method only works so well. So in addition to the kind of hypotheticals that Steve focuses on, We also do a lot of group exercises, so things that students can do together, but enduring group exercises. So this example is our group complaint exercise. This one comes from our book, but you can do this yourself. What we do is we provide a hypothetical. It's a fairly simple, straightforward hypo. And then we give our adopters this sample template complaint to share with their students. The students then go off into their groups and work on the complaint. What I've provided you with here is a sample complaint that my students created. I've redacted their names, but it's high quality stuff. I mean, they are doing amazing work. And the advantage of this is that they leave their first year of civil procedure having actually drafted a complaint. Like, they know what this looks like. They've had a hands-on experience. We also provide sample model complaints and things like that, but you can do that as well on your own. Another key thing here for the Zoom universe is that I find that putting the students into groups and having them doing this group work really helps them make connections. So because you put so much work ahead of time, before they get to class, now you have more class time for them to connect as groups and individuals, both with you doing problems, but also with each other doing these kinds of group exercises. So I find these kinds of in-class group exercises to be really effective as well. I think, Steve, you're going to take us to post-class now. Is that right?
Yeah, but I will add before we move on, students love this stuff. You'd think, okay, they're just being asked to do more work, but students will come up to me and say, you know, because this is their first year, this is the first time I felt a little bit like a lawyer trying to draft this. You know, it all makes sense now that I'm trying to apply it as opposed to having just read, you know, Twombly and Iqbal. Okay, so after class, how do we add repetition? How do we use this online environment after class? There are a number of different things that we do. We're going to talk about each of these. Recapping the material again, quizzes with immediate feedback, rubrics and sample answers, and then continuity and related exercises to keep going over the material again and again. So recaps. I start every class with it's literally 2 minutes. And I'll just go over what we covered from the class before, but I call on the students. I have name cards and I cold call and we rifle through it. But that makes them, before class, I tell them, you don't want to be sitting there looking through your notes while everyone is staring at you. So come in prepared. So they've already consolidated this information ahead of time. So I'll just ask, what's the test? I'll call on a random student, they'll answer it. You know, and I just walk through just a series of really quick reminders of what we've learned from the class before. So that's another iteration. What I'll then typically do is go over the answers to the multiple choice questions. From the way I do it, it's the same multiple choice test that they took pre-class. Now they're taking it again post-class. So they are, you know, we're now hopefully they know the answer because they've listened during class for the information to supply the answer. So I'll put up the multiple choice. I'll then show them, here's the correct answer. And I put up the number of students who got each of the answers. So they're getting some feedback on how they did. They're also understanding, how did I do compared to my classmates? So if they're the one student who had D, the answer number D here, maybe they're thinking, okay, why did I get this one that wrong when 55 of the students got it correct? And I use this information also, if I get one where only 25 of the students got it correct, and the majority got it wrong, I'll then spend a lot more time and go over why that was the right answer, maybe why some of these are distractors. So I'm giving some multiple choice strategy tips at the same time that I'm giving them the substantive information. Brooke, you do it a little differently, I think.
Yeah, just a little bit differently. So I will have assessments at the end that are a little bit different than the first quizzes, the check-in quizzes that they took. But I'm with Steve. When you are done post-class, I don't think as a professor for many years, I thought much about post-class. In this new environment, I've been so much more thoughtful about it. And I think my students have really benefited from that, because that is really what seals the deal, right? They need to then transfer all of that knowledge into something that then can move on to the next segment. And a lot of times they'll just lose it. So making them do these other assessments at the end is really important. Here's a sample of a multiple choice question that I did following venue. venue. So you'll remember with venue, I did most of it asynchronous. They had reading, they had lecture, they had a quiz embedded in the lecture. Then we talked about it a little bit in class. And then later that week, they did a multiple choice exam that had multiple subjects on it, including the venue questions. And the venue questions were harder. And like Steve, I can see what people are getting wrong and right. We can circle back to some of the things that they might be missing and just have this iterative process of revisiting these subjects as they go along. The other key is that students can go back and retake these quizzes. Now, for our materials, we provide our authors with a set of multiple choice questions that you can use, but there's also, lots of other resources out there for multiple choice. And of course, you can always draft your own. It's a pain, but once you've drafted them, they're there for you moving forward. The next thing that you can do is also provide for rubrics and sample answers. This is really important for our students, and all kinds of research shows that having them self-assess is really effective. So this is a rubric from my midterm exam that I give. So I give them a midterm that's pretty low stakes. It's only on personal jurisdiction, but this is essentially my grading sheet that I then give a little bit more background to and give to them. They then walk through this rubric on their own with their midterm to see what they did and did not understand. They also get model answers. So it's really important for them to see how this thing is done right, and then allowing them a chance to assess what they did wrong. I require my students to fill out this rubric before they're allowed to meet with me on their midterm. And the students who meet with me about their midterm and complete this rubric regularly improve their final grade. So this is really impactful. The final thing we want to talk about is continuity in the related assignments. Oh yeah, sorry, go ahead, Steve.
That's all right. Just to share my approach, I have actually rubrics that are remarkably similar. It's interesting, Brooke, because we've never exchanged rubrics, I don't think, but mine look quite a bit like yours. What I do that's a little bit different is I do peer grading. So I have a way of anonymously distributing someone's exam paper, using their exam ID number instead of name, and then giving students a rubric, and I have them grade someone else's answer, because that gives them the sense of what it's like as a professor to be hunting through and trying to see, did they actually say this anywhere in their answer? It's a little bit, I think both approaches have pros and cons, but I've decided that the peer grading gives them both sides of that experience. And then of course, in our online setting, I do all this electronically. So then like all morning today, in fact, I was doing exam review with students, and I would share my screen with them and share so they could look at their rubric and see where they got points, where they left points off the board. The beauty of a system like this, and I'd be interested if you had the same experience, Brooke, but when you meet with a student and you go over a rubric like this, at the end of the meeting, they always say, instead of, I think I deserved a better grade, they're like, oh, I can't believe I left those things out. Oh, now I see what I can do to do better. So it is, it's so objective that I haven't had in many years of doing this virtually any complaints about the grading, because it's down there in black and white.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think I've ever had a student challenge me on grading doing this model. I know it's a little scary to put your work out there, the numbers and everything, but I've never had anyone be like, well, I should have gotten a 3 here and a 2 there. That's just not what happens. They actually miss the whole thing. Another idea, Steve, that you reminded me of is that sometimes what I do is I give my students old exam questions, and then I give them 3 answers, and I redact the student numbers, obviously, and I give them an A, a B, and a C. And in their groups, they have to read it and then categorize which one they thought got the A and the B and the C. And the A and the B is always the best part, right? They can pick out the C, but the B is actually pretty good. But when they see the A, they can see the kind of deep analysis that they're missing or the issues that they're missing. So these are all really effective ways of making sure that the students see this information in different modalities. The final thing,
I love that.
Yeah, it's really fun. It's really fun. The final thing that we do is continuity in related assignments. And I think this goes back to Steve's point about scaffolding. So before we showed you the complaint exercise, well, this is the answer exercise that we do. So what we do is we then consolidate into one complaint. And then my students have to meet in groups to write an answer, but it's the same subject that they saw a week or two before, but now they're filing a different document with respect to that. And I think one of the things about civil procedure that we can all agree is that our students feel a little at sea because there's no context for what they're doing. But when they do this kind of exercise where they actually write a complaint and then the same fact pattern applies and they write an answer, they start to kind of see the flow of litigation. So Steve, if you want to show the next slides, they can see, here's the sample complaint that we give them. And again, our book provides these templates, but our students then can file the answer. And again, they work in groups and do this. And I think this does give them the sense of, like Steve said, they're doing litigation, like, wow, this is what this really is. But it also contextualizes and reinforces things that they've already done. They're looking at a complaint again, but now with a different eye. Now they're looking at the complaint with the eye of, well, if I was the defendant, how would I respond? It just really makes the rules come alive for them and sing. And so this is a really also great way to do kind of post-class, or how to make that post-class experience really impactful. So Steve, on to you for keeping the schedule, because you're running the ship.
So this for me was really one of the most difficult parts of making the transition from in-class to online teaching. So I thought I'd spend a little time talking about it. So my approach used to be, I'm going to move through class at the pace that the students seem capable of handling. So I did not have, on day one, I'm covering this exact material. Day two, I'm covering this exact material, and I don't vary from that. So I just brute force stick to a schedule. I do not teach that way. If the class was struggling, I'd slow down and spend some more time until until that vacant look on their face turned into nodding. Because of the way that, we've tried, and I think most schools are probably trying to standardize things more with online teaching using Canvas or Blackboard or something like that, with modules, and have every course have the same sort of look and feel. So I've been forced into a model where now I have week one or class one, here's what we're covering. And that's been a difficult transition for me. And it's even more difficult because, I don't know, many of you are probably doing this, we've de-densified the classroom. So instead of one class of 70 students, I have two subsections of 35 students. And I need to keep those both in exact sync with each other, because if they get off, then I get really confused about what I said and what I haven't covered in each class. So I've been forced to be now very much, according to a set schedule. So how have I done this? One thing is, I am willing to go a couple minutes late. So and students hate that, right? So it's difficult. You can't go 15 minutes late. But if I need to go 2 or 3 minutes late to catch one class up to where the other class was, because this class has asked more questions, I go a few minutes late and I ask them, I say, are you guys okay if we go 2 more minutes? I really need to keep up. And they don't mind if you ask them, and if they know it's just a little bit. On the other hand, sometimes the first class was slower, the second class, or I get through the material I think is going to take longer, quicker. And then I claim massive credit for that. So I'm like, look, it's, 7 minutes are still left in class. Remember this next time I run over. And they seem to appreciate that as well. And then the thing I've done to compensate for those times when I used to just slow down and spend more time and get behind maybe, what I've done is I'll develop some extra materials. So if I get to the end of where I'm supposed to be and they still aren't getting it, I have recorded an extra little video, maybe with some problems to work through, or given an extra exercise that I hadn't planned to do. And the feedback I've got is that really helps cure that confusion when they just aren't quite getting it. All right, and on to our last topic, Brooke.
Yeah, so I think the final thing we want to talk about, and just real quickly on the maintaining the schedule too, I totally agree with Steve. Like, one of the biggest things that this flexibility gives us is that you can just sit down for 10 minutes and record a quick video over a slide, and it really helps your students. So this just gives us all this flexibility that's really great, even though we have to keep this lockstep schedule. The last thing we want to talk about is opportunities for inclusiveness. This is something that I think many of us were doing already, but obviously it's not even an option anymore. And it's something that we need to make sure that we're doing. And depending on your text, you have some different options about what you can do. I want to cover 3 things that I think everyone can do, no matter what textbook you're using. And that is set the foundation, give them resources, and be responsive. So the first thing I want to talk about is setting the foundation. And that is all about creating whatever norms you're going to have in your classroom. Many of you may be familiar with this. These are from Equity Matters Brave Color Space, and that is something that you can pay a license for. I've paid the license to get this, and then I modified it for our civil procedure community. This is just a basic primer for how we are going to interact as a class. The one I want to focus you on is the second one, which is keep focused on our common goal, which is that we care deeply about learning. We care about how racism, sexism, and othering can impact learning. And this is something that I think is really important to be upfront about before you start your class. This is actually a learning objective that I have in my syllabus as well. What this does is it welcomes in students who are very concerned about this material not being covered in their class. So it makes them feel like, okay, good, I am welcome here, and this is going to be covered. What it also does is for students who might be scared of it or maybe even hostile to it, what it does is it puts them on notice. Like, this is something that we're going to do in our class. And so they're not on their heels when it comes up. It just creates a norm around how we're going to interact. The other thing I would do is when we get ready to have a harder discussion, say around Iqbal or Scott v. Harris, I would give them these norms. They come into class and here they are again. Hey, everyone, just a reminder, we've been on Zooms for 8 hours a day. We're all really tired. You're grouchy, you haven't eaten, you haven't slept. Don't take it out on each other. These are our norms. These are really important. So I think this kind of norm setting is critical. You can do this where you just give them the norms, or you can have them create their own. There's all kinds of options there, but I would really recommend that you do that. The second thing you should do is give them resources. You can't have a week at the end of your semester that's, race and or gender and. That is, to be frank, insulting, right? The bottom line is that race and gender and sexual orientation and ability are infused in the law. They are the law. Like, you can't disaggregate those things. And so what you need to be aware of is integrating these materials into what you're teaching. And that can be a little daunting, I think, for professors, because where do I do it and how do I do it? I would recommend that you just pick a handful of resources that you're really comfortable with. So this one by Shireen Sanar at Stanford Law School is an article about the lost story of Iqbal, and it's about Javad Iqbal. This is a really easy one to use. You can excerpt parts of the chapter, and after you read the case, you can assign this to your students and have really fruitful, amazing discussions about race and how it impacted this particular decision. You don't have to try to be something that you're not, but you do have to try. You have to find these resources and you have to integrate them into your materials and make them available to your students. You will find then that your students will find more materials on their own. And because that door is open, they're going to share those materials with you, and you are in a discussion about these kinds of issues, and you're not in some kind of, antagonistic relationship with it. So I think it really opens everything up for students and makes them feel included. The final thing is you got to be responsive, right? You have got to respond to what's happening. If you don't, it's at your own peril. We are surrounded by this. It is happening all the time. And so when you see opportunities to bring what's happening in the real world into your class, don't be afraid if it involves an issue of race. That's okay. That is what this is about. So for example, when a lot of the information around Breonna Taylor was coming out this past fall, when they were trying to go criminally after the officers, the civil suit came out, and we all kind of understood what the civil suit was about. And all I did was I went and found the Breonna Taylor complaint that her family had filed, and it was filed in state court, and it raised only state claims. By then, my students and I had covered federal question jurisdiction, subject matter jurisdiction, and pleading. And I was able to say to them, let's look at this complaint. What do you think? That's interesting. There's only state law claims. Why did they do that? Why did they file in state court? Is it removable? Yes or no? And it was really an amazing way to do that scaffolding that we've been talking about, because they were able to integrate all that they knew about civil procedure into the decisions that Breonna Taylor's family made about this particular litigation. And that really made them feel like what they were doing was impactful and meaningful in the world around them. So when you see things in the news, don't be afraid to bring it in and have these discussions, because your students are already reading and thinking about this stuff anyway, and you need to welcome them into that discussion and make sure that they can have it with you. I think that's all I have on that. I just want to say that I know this can be scary sometimes to do that work, so I'm happy to talk to anyone about how to best do that offline. So please feel free to approach me anytime. I think now we're going to open it up for questions. Is that right, Steve? And West people? Unless you have anything to add, Steve.
No, I don't have anything. I guess the only thing I'd add in closing is I love being in the classroom. I love teaching in person. I don't love teaching online. So I think, there are probably lots of people who feel the same way, that we are right now being forced to do this. And whenever it is that that we're back to normal, if that ever happens, I'll go back to being in the classroom as much as possible. But I have learned so many new techniques and approaches and modalities through this being forced to do online teaching, that I think the way I teach when I go back in the classroom is going to be completely different and completely shaped by the way I've had to learn to do things this last year and a half. So I think these lessons, I look at it now not as what am I forced to do to get through this year, but what can I develop that's going to that will probably enrich my teaching kind of forever. So I think if you can look at it as an opportunity, that's a good way to view it.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think I might have enjoyed online teaching a little bit more than you, Steve, but I'm still looking back to getting into the classroom. But I will forever teach differently. And it's funny because I thought I was a pretty good teacher before, and now I realize all the things that I should have been doing all along. And I do really appreciate that there is that silver lining here. I will integrate all of these techniques into my classroom environment as well.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to stop the share now, and we can see if there are any questions and answer them. Which I think we're going to get help from Rachel, I'm hoping.
I think we're getting help. Oh, here we go. Okay. Do you have to use a lot of technology to successfully teach online? And do I need clickers and movies or other things than that? And I think the answer there is no. I think much like integrating inclusive materials into your classroom, you have to do what you're comfortable with. You have to evolve. And so I have gotten more comfortable with certain technologies, but I'm not going to do them all at once. So I might try one new thing at a little bit at a time. But I think what we're trying to say, what Steve and I are trying to communicate, is that you already have a lot of these resources at your disposal. You need to transfer them into different modalities, but they're all there. If you have problems and things like that, you can turn them into these learning moments. I don't know if you have a thought about that, Steve.
No, I'm not using any new technologies other than Zoom, which we've all had to become experts at. But, I'm not using clickers. I actually like close your eyes and raise your hand, or just raise your hand. I use a lot of hand raising to get a sense of where the class is. And I don't even really use a lot of breakout rooms because all of those things take time. And so I certainly don't do on the fly polls and things like that, because I think those are cool and slick, but unless you're really good at them, which I'm not, I think class time is so valuable that you can do all this stuff without the bells and whistles.
Yeah, so I think the next question is, do you have to create all new materials to successfully teach online? And I guess this is where I would say it depends, right? It depends on the book you're using and how you have taught up to now. I had a lot of materials that I had already created over time that I could transfer. But I'll have to say, the book that Steve and I are lucky enough to co-author has a plethora of materials as well. So it already had a bunch of exercises in it. And the teaching website provided all the sample answers and all the forms and everything. So I didn't have to create anything. I just had to upload it onto Canvas. And that was a huge savings for me. Same goes for a lot of the multiple choice questions or quizzes. All I had to do was just move the information from a Word document into Canvas, which now it lives there, and that's great. But I really think you don't have to create a ton of new materials. You just have to shift what you've been doing into something that is more, I guess, user-friendly.
Yeah, that's my feeling as well. Certainly our philosophy and the reason we wrote the book is because we have this view towards how to use class time and how to teach, and repetition was baked into everything we did. The hardest part for me actually was we used Blackboard, unfortunately. I shouldn't say it. We used Blackboard instead of Canvas. Let's redact that. So the hardest part for me was creating all these modules in the online platform, but the teaching part, all of the things I was already doing pretty well translated.
Yeah, so Steve, another question, I think we do this differently, so this will be good, is what's involved in making the videos in terms of time and technology? So how do you do your videos actually?
Yeah, so we now use MediaSite. That's our platform. And it has a recorder where you can so there's a lot of different ways people do it. A lot of people have their screen split in some fashion, and they have a picture of themselves talking as well as the slides. I don't do that. I don't think anybody wants to see me talking. I think it's, either distracting or neutral at best. So I don't do that. And that way I don't have to put a tie on. So I pull up my PowerPoint slides, I hit play, and then I just say what I would say if I was in class. And if I mess up, either I just don't care, or sometimes the only editing our program actually allows you to do is cut something out of the middle or cut something out of the end. So if I badly mess up, I just back up a few, maybe I go back to the beginning of the slide and start over and then cut it out afterwards. But I don't do any practice. I never practice. I don't do any editing other than occasionally cutting out the first few seconds at the beginning when I say, we're going to start, that's it. It's really pretty painless. How do you do it?
I'm same. So I use, because we have Canvas, I use Studio, right? Which just allows you to capture your screen. And same thing, I don't put my face in it. But what I've found is that it's kind of, it's quaint. Like they could get used to my voice, and so they could hear a cat in the background or a kid. And I think it's comforting to them that this is life, right? We're all in this situation. So I, like you, let the recording go. And if I made a mistake in the first couple of minutes, I would try to redo it. But otherwise, the mistakes are in there, warts and all, the the whatever. Just, I get a PowerPoint that I like, I play it, I just lecture free form over it. And then we let it go. The great thing about Studio is that you can embed the quiz questions too. So I really enjoy that feature because you just go in and embed. And I did a lot of simple things like true and false. And sometimes I would make them, annoying, like in that teacher annoying way, like, venue is the coolest concept ever, true or false, and it's just a way to make sure that they're paying attention and that they're engaged. But I also found,
Can I ask you on that?
Yeah.
How does that then work in terms of, like, walk us through how the question aspect works of that? Like, do they answer it? And then do they get feedback? How's that happen?
Yeah, it's the same. So it's a great little feature. So you embed the question and that you can have it so that they have to answer it before they move on. And so the question pops up, and it's just like any other multiple choice question in your online forum. So the question comes up and then they answer it, and then it gives the explanation. And they can go back and do it again, and then it just proceeds. And it's just, I think, a really effective way to do that check-in as they're doing that 10-minute PowerPoint, right? So it just keeps them engaged. But they also like to go for a walk and listen to the PowerPoint or something too. You don't have to watch it all the time. You can hear it, so they could rehear it and all that stuff.
I actually have a lot of students. I have students who listen to them on their drive into school. Another thing that we didn't say though is it's critical to keep them short, right?
Yes.
You can't have a half-hour video. I try to keep mine under 10 minutes, certainly under 15 minutes at the longest. I feel like a 12-minute video is probably too long.
I
So
totally
I would take a topic. If you feel like there's more that you want to say, sometimes I'll have them watch 3 videos in a week.
Yeah.
And they might be 3 6-minute videos opposed to one 18-minute video. That's much better.
I totally agree. And I think it's important to make these things bite-sized, right? It's because I think that's the thing about civil procedure when I look at it. It's so overwhelming. It is so much material. And the more you can break it down into these bite-sized pieces, you know, our book is very modular. Like I tend to think that way. I try to break it up for my students that way. So they really do feel like they're just getting pieces at a time. Then they can see the whole picture. The other thing you can use videos for, which I think is really effective, is midterm and exam feedback. So I gave them my midterm feedback and I put together a PowerPoint and just talked over that. The worst thing in the world is sitting in a class waiting to get your midterm back and asking your teacher to stand there and talk to you about it while you're waiting for your exam, right? That is painful and I hated doing it. I will never do it that way again. They got their exams after class, then they could all go watch a video on their own. Right? This is like one of the first feedback they're getting. It was so important that they could do that privately. And so I think that we really have to think about how we could use these videos in a way to just make their lives a lot easier. It's actually more humane, I think, to do it that way. So that's another way to use video. Go ahead, Steve. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's not only is it more humane, because I agree with you 100%. And I did that for the first time this year as well. And it worked out really well. But again, you're preserving then class time. Class time is so valuable. You don't get enough of it, right? So if you can take that, 15 minutes when you were talking about how to answer the exam questions and what were the critical and the tricky issues and all that, and how to write an essay, and put that on a video, then you've got more time for interactive stuff in class. And that's really important.
Yeah, I totally agree. So this one's for you, Steve, because you actually bravely did this. What is your best piece of advice for teaching in a high flex situation? Because I was 100% Zoom, so I haven't done high flex yet. So I think people really want to know how to do that.
Oh yeah, so that's been also really, candidly, one of the more challenging aspects is I have probably 75% of my students in the classroom and 20 over the two sections are a little different, but roughly 75, 25% on Zoom, 75% in the classroom. They sort of have a choice. Pretty much we took any excuse anybody had not to come in, but most of the students want to come in. So how do you do that? A couple things that have been helpful. One, I've been able to get a TA for my sections, and the TA's responsibility is to attend class and monitor Zoom. So students can raise questions by chatting to the TA, who will then bring them to my attention. Or if they raise their hand and I don't pick up on it, the TA will say, hey, Rachel has a question or something like that. So that's one thing. The other thing, which I always have done, is I do a ton of cold calling. I have note cards that they fill at the beginning, and I I'll call on almost every student, every class. And the note cards keep you from ignoring the people on Zoom, because it's much easier to focus on the people who are there in person. And you need some technique to make sure you're bringing in those people on Zoom as well. So I use the note cards to make sure they get their fair share of talking. But I do agree that makes it a lot trickier. It's harder to do group assignments when you have some in class, and the people who are in class have to be 6 feet apart from each other, so they can't really work in a group. So it does add complication.
So Rachel, I don't know if we have more questions. I don't see any more
questions before we close up. Looks like one more just came through.
This seems like a lot of work when I'm just going back in person teaching as soon as COVID allows. I guess it seems like a lot of work, and I totally understand that impulse. I felt like it was going to be a lot of work when I went into it. But again, I guess it begs the question of what your existing resources already are. If you already have materials that you created or that your book is giving you that you can then just translate into an online format, it's no work at all. And you could probably even have an administrative assistant enter, or a research assistant enter in some of the information onto whatever learning platform you're doing. I think what Steve and I are trying to communicate is that it actually is a lot less work if you allow the students to do more outside of class. So then you have class to really kind of have review sessions with them and really go over problems and do things with them. So I would say to folks who are concerned about it, that just really take a good inventory of the materials that you have, and honestly the books that you're using, and try to figure out what is going to make it the easiest for you. Because I think students now, having had a taste of this experience, are going to expect it, and I think largely demand it. So we're going to have to get used to providing this kind of iterative level of education. It's just going to be the norm. And so it is something that we're going to have to invest in.
Yeah, and that gets back to something I said, I think at the close of the presentation portion, which is, I'm not quite as good at this stuff as Brooke is. So it has been more work for me this semester. Converting to this new format has taken some time and some work, but I feel like it's work that's going to pay off for years. And I don't feel like I'm doing this work just for this year while we're online. I feel like everything I'm doing, I'm going to use next year and the year after and the year after. So even though for many of us, there may be a learning curve and there may be some more time initially, it's time well spent, and the time that's going to pay dividends, as you go forward.
And I'll add to that the student response is incredibly positive. So, I mean, I think I've seen a lot on Twitter about how the comments and, have been harsh under COVID, because our students are under so much pressure, and obviously they are trying to manage so many different things. And the feedback that I got on the things that I did and how I taught in Zoom were exceedingly positive. And I think it was largely because that vulnerability of like, hey, we're in this together, but also just trying to give them as many opportunities to enter learning as I possibly could. And when they can see that effort, I think they really appreciate it. And again, I will never go back to teaching the way I used to. It will never look the same, because I just see what value there is in making sure they have all these chances to really interface with the material.
Yeah, I had exactly the same experience. My evaluations were extremely positive, and particularly focusing on all of these things that Brooke and I are doing to try to make the online or hybrid experience as rich as we can. The students love that stuff and really, really appreciate it. And they can see how much how much work goes into it. Sometimes the things that actually even aren't that much work, like doing these videos, which I was going to do anyway. But it looks like a lot of work, and they're very appreciative. So it does really matter to students, and they really get a lot out of it. So that commends it as well.
Any other questions before we close down for the day?
I'll just say it's been a lot of fun actually talking about this. I've learned some stuff from you today, Brooke, that I didn't know. So, and Rachel, thank you very much for organizing this.
Really helpful tips. This was great. Thank you all for attending, and thank you, Brooke and Steve. This was wonderful. We are recording, and we will make this available after the live session ends. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I also want to welcome anybody watching this video now or afterwards to follow up with me and Steve directly, or any of our co-authors. We very graciously share our material. For us, this is a CIPRO community, so we are happy to help in any way that we can. We're all here for the better of our students, so we welcome that feedback or any kind of inquiries. We're here for you, so bring it. Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Steve. I love working with Steve. I'm so lucky. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you both so much.
Thank
you, everyone. Have a great weekend. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
So long.